Go live now to Melbourne. I'm bringing the Shadow Home Affairs Minister, James Patterson. Thank you for your time. You had some very interesting comments on the radio earlier today, warning anyone attending a rally in solidarity with Palestinians and the events in Israel over the last 24 hours that, well, you reminded people that Hamas and Hezbollah are both listed terrorist organisations in this country, Senator Patterson.
Kieran, that's right. When I chaired the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security in the last Parliament, I led a parliamentary inquiry into those two organisations, and that committee made a unanimous and bipartisan recommendation that the previous listings, which only dealt with the so-called terrorist or so-called military wings of those organisations, should instead be broadened to cover those entire organisations. That we should end the fiction that there is a so-called political arm of Hamas and a military arm of Hamas. They're all one organisation, and Hamas and Hezbollah's leaders are both very clear about that. Now, the important thing about that for Australians is that the legal effect of that means that it is now a crime under the Commonwealth Criminal Code to associate with a terrorist organisation. And that includes all of Hamas and all of Hezbollah. Now, that's why I think it's very important that Australians, if they want to protest about this issue, and they're entitled to do so peacefully, that they don't in any way associate themselves with Hamas. Now, to be clear, it is unlikely to meet the legal threshold for prosecution simply attending a rally or even holding a flag, as offensive and stupid as that would be. But providing material assistance to either of these organisations, particularly in terms of fundraising or recruitment, or in fact incitement to violence, could meet that threshold, and it's a very serious crime that attracts serious penalties.
There is obviously a lot of shock and mourning within the Jewish community in Australia and around the world. What was your reaction, though, to these comments made by an imam in Sydney, southwest Sydney, last night, celebrating and praising the events that unfolded the day before in Israel?
What's particularly troubling about these comments, Kieran, is that it was not in response to an Israeli retaliatory attack on Gaza that might have had some incidental or accidental civilian deaths. This was just in response to those first images that we all saw of Hamas terrorists getting into Israel, kidnapping men, women and children, including the elderly, taking them back into Gaza, and in many instances executing them, and in other instances abusing them, documenting it and putting it up on social media. These are unquestionably crimes against humanity, and have any Australian person celebrating that is an abhorrent thing. That imam should be ashamed of himself, and those who went along and cheered him should be ashamed of themselves as well. And people like that have no position, have no place in community leadership in this country at all.
Well, there are more rallies in solidarity with Palestinians, apparently, even one, as we alluded to earlier, in Sydney about an hour from now. Will our security agencies have a close eye on attendees and behaviour and comments?
Our security agencies will, as they always do, be on the lookout not for people's political views and their right to protest, which is protected in Australia, but their propensity and their willingness to engage in violence or engage in the incitement to violence. Those are crimes in Australia, as they should be. So people's political opinions on the conflict between Israel and Palestine is a matter for them. But if they cross that line into threatening other members of the Australian community or threatening violence, then they will be harshly dealt with by the law, as they should be. Unfortunately, Kieran, we know in previous conflicts like this, particularly in 2006 with Hezbollah, Jewish Australians, as well as Jewish facilities like synagogues and schools and other places, did come under threat. And it is very important that our law enforcement, security and intelligence agencies are on top of that threat, so we make sure there is absolutely no violence here in Australia.
This was 50 years on from the Yom Kippur War, another invasion that took place on a holiday, albeit that was more traditional warfare. These were terrorist attacks and atrocities that we've seen carried out in Israel. Can't be described as in any other way, but terrorism, indiscriminate atrocities that have been seen where kids, elderly women and anyone they could shoot, they did. But the parallel is there. This is another massive failure of Israeli intelligence, and a real surprise, I think, for a lot of us who have seen the IDF and the Israeli intelligence services over many years be so effective and probably the best military in the Middle East.
Kieran, I have no doubt, like following the intelligence failure in 1979, there will be many inquiries in Israel to get to the bottom of whether there were any signs of this, and if so, how those signs were missed and why they were missed and how they should never be missed again. But you are right to compare it to 1973. It is at least as shocking for the Israeli populace as that event was, although it has cost more human lives already. In fact, on the first day of this conflict, more Jews died than in any incident since the end of the Holocaust. It is really an extraordinary event, and I've seen others like my former colleague Dave Sharma say this is Israel's 9/11, and I think he's right. Psychologically, it has shattered this sense of security and safety that many Israelis for the best part of the last decade have felt that they lived under, because the IDF is a highly capable military. The Israeli intelligence services are highly capable, but this is a reminder for all countries actually that no matter how capable our intelligence and military apparatus is, they can't see everything and they can't stop everything.
Yeah, well, this one is just extraordinary. The way that they were able to breach by air, by sea, by that fence, which was meant to have all sorts of security around it, but it clearly didn't. When you look at the future for Israel, first of all, I guess this unity government is one thing, but they need to unify in the longer term, because one of the damaging elements of the last few years has been a real polarisation and division within the Israeli political debate.
Kieran, I'm reluctant to give public advice to the Israeli government or the Israeli community, but I think the point that you make is right. I think it's a lesson actually for all democracies that internal division and disunity is very harmful. And in dangerous security environment, as Israel lives permanently, and in a dangerous strategic environment in which Australia finds ourselves in the Indo-Pacific, that division and that disunity can be taken advantage of by others. It can be weaponised by others, and it is a weakness that they seek to exploit. And so unity of purpose and commonality and collegiality is a good thing for us to have in its own right, but it is also a very good thing to have if we're in uncertain strategic times.
The morning there in Gaza, as we see, it's quiet at the moment, but no doubt we will see more action throughout the day and coming days. A ground invasion expected. James Patterson, thank you very much for your time. The Shadow Home Affairs Minister joining us live from Melbourne. Thanks,
Kieran.
After